Hi, this is a webinar originally created for my member program at stephenhorn.com as part of a series called The Holistic Perspective. We hope you enjoy it.
Tonight we're going to talk about happiness, choosing to be happy. And this is really an extension of the talk we had last time about gratitude in the holistic perspective, as I think you'll see. But to kind of get the tone started for this evening, I'd like you to think about what qualities attract you in other people. In other words, when you think about someone that you want to be have for a friend or you want to hang around with, what are they like? I mean, do you prefer to hang around people who are positive, who are talking about positive, interesting things, or people who are griping and complaining about everything that's going wrong in their lives? Do you prefer to be with people who are happy and upbeat and cheerful, or people who are mopey and sad and depressed and so forth? Or you prefer to be around someone who laughs or someone who's complaining? You know, you would you rather associate with people who are honest, or would you rather associate with people who are dishonest? And would you rather associate with people who are, quite forgiving, and or people who get irritated with you easily? I mean, the answer is pretty obvious for most of us. I personally like hanging around positive, happy people. I like people who are laughing and having fun. I like people who are honest, and I like people, who are kind of patient with your faults and quick to forgive and so forth. So this brings up an interesting thing. Because you see, there's one person that you'll never be able to escape. There's one person that you're going to have to live with for the rest of eternity. You're never going to be able to get away from them. They're always going to be in your company, and that person is the person that you see when you look in the mirror. That person is you. So really, when you think about it, you're the one who has to constantly associate with you. So doesn't it make sense that you want to cultivate the qualities that make you a pleasant person to be with? Not for the sake of anyone else, but the fact that you're a pleasant person for yourself to be with. And that's really kind of leads into the discussion tonight about choosing to be happy, choosing to be, a happy, positive, upbeat person. Most people, this is one of the key things I've learned in emotional healing, is that most people are constantly trying to escape themselves. They're constantly trying to run away from themselves, from what's inside of them. Um, and they do this by, number one, staying constantly busy, uh, you know, constantly occupying themselves, even, when they're driving or whatever, they've got to be listening to the radio. They've got to be talking to someone on the phone. They've got to be constantly busy, because the moment they slow down and are quiet, or have to be by themselves, they have to confront themselves, and that's difficult. I mean, if you're uncomfortable when you have to just spend a little quiet time alone and there's no one else around, what that means is you're uncomfortable with you. And unfortunately, you're not able to run away with yourself. Another way people run away from themselves is to develop a religious belief system to give themselves a sense of identity. So that basically, I'm a conservative. I do this. I do that. I do that. Blah 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 blah. I blah 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 blah. And so this I am these fixed things basically gives them a sense of who they are. But we're much more than that. As one of the storytellers, that I'm going to talk about tonight says, if you are identify yourself that you're a Republican, and then sometime down the road you switch to being a Democrat, have you changed? Okay, has you're still the same person. We also, to try to protect ourselves from having to deal with what's inside of us, we often become judgmental of others, because by being judgmental of others, by developing this rigid belief system that I behave like this and other people don't, then I am able to create this false sense of self that I run away with. But one of the things I really want to mention is people spend a lot of time pursuing things that they believe will make them happy, such as wealth or material possessions, sex, or relationships, power and authority, or fame. Many people are constantly pursuing these things, and the reason that they pursue these things is because they believe that these things are going to ultimately make them happy. So one of the people I'm going to quote a lot from tonight is Anthony DeMello. So Anthony DeMello was a Jesuit priest living in India, and he met a man who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and had been given that he only had a few months to live. And he said that this was one of the happiest men he'd ever met. And meeting this man gave him a spiritual awakening. And the spiritual awakening was this. He realized that happiness was not dependent on the circumstances of one's life, and he had never before considered that. He'd always believed that happiness depended on the life circumstances you were in. But here was a guy who, had a terminal illness. He was dying. He knew he was dying, and he was extremely happy. And this really changed him. So he's one of my favorite authors, and I'm going to quote a bunch of stories that he tells from a book he wrote called Conversations with the Masters. And what it is it's a whole bunch of fictitious stories or little stories about a fictitious spiritual master, and they're designed to illustrate points about the spiritual life. So they're kind of fun stories, and I like them, and we'll see some of them about happiness. So this is the first one. From this book, Awakening, Conversations with the Masters. The master never seemed to have his fill of gazing at his newborn child. What do you want him to be when he grows up? Someone asked. Outrageously happy, said the master. That's an interesting answer. Outrageously happy. Just whatever I want him to be, I want him to be happy. That's an attitude that's different. He has a story in there also where the master sees a woman with two children in the market, and he says, "Oh, what cute children! How old are they?" And she says, "The doctor is 2 and the lawyer is 3." Which is kind of the opposite thing of wanting your children to be a doctor or a lawyer or some other kind of thing that you have. But the whole crux of this is that I've started to realize that part of the reason why we think that happiness is dependent on our circumstances and that has to be pursued, to be achieved, is because we confuse happiness with excitement. Christmas is coming up, and I can remember being little, and we lived in a 2-story house. The way my parents did Christmas is that, they wrapped up presents under the tree, but Santa Claus left the presents, unwrapped around the tree in the living room. And I remember us all like waking up upstairs and all just waiting because we couldn't go downstairs until everybody was up and everybody was ready to go downstairs. And I can remember the anticipation, the excitement, what has Santa Claus brought? And that excitement is kind of fun, but excitement generally has you get excited and then you kind of let down after you've ripped off all the presents and everything. Hey, it's over. Boom. Like maybe you buy a new car and you're really excited, and then that excitement wears off, and so on and so forth. So happiness is a steady state. It's something that doesn't have the ups and downs that excitement does. And along the same lines, this is, not so much for the topic tonight, but I think that we mistake having inner peace for having a lack of being in a fight. Just because you're not fighting with someone doesn't mean that you have inner peace. You can be a total turmoil inside and not be fighting with anybody. but you can be, having chaotic stuff going on inside of you. And I've talked about the other one in previous sessions, that we confuse love with desire and attachment. And I did a whole webinar on love and explaining that desire, which is perceiving that we want something because we think it will be beneficial to us, or we like it, or we enjoy it, or whatever, is different. That kind of love, that love of desire, is not the same as real unconditional love. And we also confuse pleasure with stimulation. Again, something stimulates you. You eat something, whatever, and it's stimulating to you, or you have sex and it's stimulating to you. Or you do things that numb your pain, like eating. Pleasure and happiness and love and inner peace are all interconnected. They're all related to one another. When you're in a true state of happiness, you're also in a true state of love. You're also in a state of inner peace, and you're also in a state of pleasure, meaning that you're having a pleasurable sensation of just being. And most people are riding these waves of excitement and stimulation and desire and conflict constantly. But there's a metaphor for that. All of that is like the surface on the ocean, that the waves are going up and down. But if you dive down a little deeper below the surface, there's this calm, this sort of calm, more tranquil thing just underneath the surface. And that's true with our being too. What's going on the surface is all this ups and downs of emotion, but underneath that is something that we can tap into that's very steady state. It's not so up and down. It's not so erratic. And that steady state is one of happiness, inner peace, a sense of love, and just this feeling good, this just genuine pleasure with life. So this is what another author that I really love, Michael Singer, in his book, The Untethered Soul, has to say. And this book was actually the one that made me decide to actually put together this presentation. He says, people tend to burden themselves with so many choices, but in the end, you can throw it all away and just make one basic underlying decision. Do you want to be happy, or do you not want to be happy? It's really that simple. Once you make that choice, your path through life becomes totally clear. Do you want to be happy, or don't you want to be happy? There's a choice, okay? Now, if you think about it, this is actually sort of the natural state, okay? If you look at children, unless they're in, really being traumatized or abused, children tend to be happy. In fact, I was watching Kitchen Impossible last night with Robert Irving, and he went to a camp, and the camp was full of children with disabilities, children with terminal illnesses, children with serious diseases and everything, and all the children were playing and smiling and having a good time. Now, you put a lot of adults into the same situation of having a terminal illness or having some kind of disability, and they wouldn't even be able to achieve that. And we're going to talk about why. But really, our natural state, the state we were born with, is the state of kind of being in delight with life and being happy with life. And yes, having the occasional emotional ups and downs, but really our natural steady state thing is to be happy. And somehow something has happened that's actually pulled us up into that turbulence, and we've lost the ability to go in and access that deeper thing. Now he says, Michael Singer goes on and says, most people don't dare to give themselves that choice. In other words, the choice to be happy, because they think it's not under their control. Someone might say, well, of course I want to be happy, but my wife left me. Okay? In other words, they want to be happy, but not if their wife leaves them. But that wasn't the question. Do you want to be happy? If you keep it that simple, you will see that it is really under your control. It's just that you have a deep-seated set of preferences that get in the way. In other words, what he's saying is that we have made a decision that happiness is dependent on the circumstances of our life, and therefore we have acquired a set of preferences that if things don't work out the way we want them, then we have decided we won't be happy, and that we can't be happy. And therefore, we have basically, instead of choosing happiness, we have chosen preferences. We've put other things ahead of our happiness in importance in our life. We've chosen our career or our finances or our relationships or whatever are more important to us than our happiness. That's the essence of what he's saying here. Now, this is a related little story from Anthony DeMello. Again, one of his little conversations with the masters. The master says one reason people are so unhappy is that they think there is nothing they cannot change. The master especially enjoyed the story of the man who said to the shopkeeper, "The radio you sold me is excellent for quality of sound. Well, I want to exchange it for one that has better programming." And that's sort of the way we view things in life. We think that that we can change, certain things that aren't in our power to change. And the funny thing is we've also decided that if those things can't be changed, that we're going to not be happy. Another story from Conversations with the Masters. Who is a happy person? One that has no resources and no hope and doesn't need any, said the master. These little stories from this book are intended to make you think. And I put this picture in here because this is a actual editorial photograph from the clip art thing. It's not a posed photograph. It's actually a photograph taken of African children who are probably living, in a heck of a lot poorer circumstances than most people in the United States are living, and they're very happy. And I've read this, a lot of people go into third world countries and where people have often much less in the way of material possessions than Americans do, and they're so much happier than Americans are, which really makes you wonder, what's the point of what we're doing if it's not making us happy? It's a really interesting thing to ponder, And that little story and that picture led me to think about a book that I really love and that I decided I need to reread, called The Continuum Concept: In Search of Happiness Lost. Now, this book was written by a lady who made, I think it was 5 different trips to go be with these natives, the Tarupan Indians. And she's based on what she learned from these people who were not really exposed to or tainted by Western civilization. She basically realized how wrong our culture is at its very foundations and how we approach life and how we approach parenting and everything. This was an account, part of, I think, what was her second visit down there. And she says, I had seen the Tarupan Indians. They were the happiest people I had seen anywhere, but I hardly noticed it then. In other words, she hardly noticed that these people were happy then. And she says, the children were uniformly well behaved, never fought, were never punished, always obeyed happily and instantly, but I never asked myself why. Now, that was the thing that she observed that kind of just started waking her up, as she realized that none of these children were ever punished, but yet they all obeyed very quickly. They were very well behaved. The children didn't fight with each other. The adults were constantly happy. In fact, she said her first attitude about that was that she thought they were kind of simpletons, and naive and very unsophisticated because they were laughing and joking and happy all the time. And she thought of that as being like frivolous and silly and blah, 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 and everything else like that. And interestingly enough, I was listening to a different program by Tom Brown Jr., who teaches survival and basically purports that he learned from a Native American. But he said in this program I listened to him that if you read the accounts of early explorers in Africa and the Americas, they write that they knew that they were approaching a village from a mile or two away because they would start to hear the sound of laughter and singing. Laughter and singing. Can you imagine living in a community where people are laughing and singing most of the time? Certainly would be strange to us, right? Anyway, she says, in that utterly foreign land, I failed to notice that much of the unreal quality of its people was accounted for by an absence of unhappiness, a large factor in every society familiar to me. In other words, she says the idea that this seems so foreign to her, she came to realize was partly because the people were so dang happy, and that just seems so weird to her. Okay? Now, this is an example, as she said, of the difference between people in our culture and the people in their culture. They were having to make a difficult portage around a stretch on the river where they couldn't take the canoes, and it was very rocky, and they were slipping, and they were getting cuts and bruises on their feet from everything. And she basically stepped off back to take some pictures, and as she was looking down on the scene, this is what she saw. Okay? Here before me were several men engaged in a difficult task. Two, the Italians, okay, were tense, frowning, losing their tempers and everything, and cursing nonstop. The rest, the Indians, were having a fine time. They were laughing at the unwieldiness of the canoe, making a game of the battle, relaxed between pushes, laughing over their own scrapes. When the canoe started to fall over and pin one of them, they laughed. In other words, they were undergoing the same hardship, the same physical pain, the same physical excursion, and one of the group is complaining, moaning, bitching, griping, which is how you see most people in our society handle difficulty, and the other group is laughing, playing, and interacting and enjoying themselves. Okay? All were doing the same root work. All were experiencing strain and pain. There was no difference in our situations except that we had been conditioned by our culture to believe that such a combination of circumstances constituted an unquestionable low on the scale of well-being, and were quite unaware that we had any other options in the matter. This is what we're talking about. This is what Michael Singer is talking about in The Untethered Soul. We've placed so many choices, so many decisions, so many preferences ahead of our happiness, and we've decided that it's impossible to be happy without them, that we've literally made it impossible for us to be happy. Because, or at least except on very rare occasions when we get excited or we get stimulated, and then we feel temporarily happy, and then we go back to being miserable. Because we have placed the ability for us to be happy outside of ourselves on life circumstances. So this is going on with what Michael Singer says. He says, you don't really mean it when you say you're willing to be happy. You want to qualify it. You want to say that as long as this doesn't happen, or as long as that doesn't happen, then you're willing to be happy. That's why it seems like it's out of your control. Any condition you create will limit your happiness. Now, I had a profound I was familiar with the idea of the happiness as an inside job, and I'd heard it. But there was something about that particular wording in this book that, struck me between the eyes, that you don't really want to be happy, that you really are only willing to be happy if certain things go the way you want to. And I looked at that and I thought, that's really true. I choose when I have to do bookkeeping and accounting stuff at the work. I choose to be tense and stressed and miserable. I'm choosing when certain tasks, certain situations come up to be stressed and tested. And why should I do that? Why should I let that external circumstance stop me from being happy? Why should I let anything stop me from being happy? And so I started to play with that more. I started to look around and see, let's just choose to be happy. And if someone else is miserable, that's their problem, not mine. Now, I've had some. I have to say that this has been a very interesting journey for me because I got this book actually as a Christmas gift from Ellen Tart Jensen last Christmas. So it's been uh, not quite a year since I read it. I think I read it in January of this year. And so I've been gradually working on this process of deciding to choose to be happy instead of choosing to be unhappy. And when something happens that's not according to my preference, I've just decided I'm going to be happy anyway. And it's really interesting how that starts to affect your life when you make that choice, because things that used to bother me are starting to not bother me anymore, which is really interesting. And I'm looking in my face when I'm looking in the mirror, and I'm seeing a much happier, more relaxed person as I've worked on this, which is really kind of fun. Um, and parallel to this, I mean, and it was fun putting this together because, I was going back and forth between these two books with the quotes and seeing how these two authors are teaching very similar principles using different techniques. Um, Another of the stories about the fictitious spiritual master. How does one obtain happiness? The master replies, by learning to be content with whatever one gets. Then one can't ever desire anything? Oh, yes, one can, said the master, provided one has the attitude of an anxious father I once met in a delivery ward. When the nurse said, I know that you were hoping to get a boy, but it's a baby girl. And the man replied, oh, it really doesn't matter because I was hoping it would be a girl if it wasn't a boy. So, uh, if it's still fine to desire things, but if you get so attached to it that you decide that if you don't get it, you're not going to be happy, then that's not the point. You can still have wants and whatever, but you take it that it's an enjoyment of the process or the journey, not an not that you're not going to be happy until you get the thing that you want. Now, one of the ways that we really, really make ourselves miserable is especially not by trying to change circumstances, but by trying to change other people. And so I like this little story from Conversations with the Masters. Each time you seek to change another, said the master, ask yourself this: what will be served by this change? My pride, my pleasure, or my profit? What he's saying, if you think about it for a minute, is that all of our desires to change other people are like 99.9% of the time motivated by our own selfishness, by our own self-interest. We're not really, we kid ourselves, that we want to change our children because we think it's in their best interest, or we want to change our spouse because we think it's in their best interest, or we want to change, somebody else because it's good for them. When in reality, if you really look inside, it's you that wants them to change for your benefit. Okay. And I've often stated that if you want someone to change, you've got to be a salesperson, and to sell someone on something, you've got to show them why it's in their benefit. So if you really want to change someone, you have to think, well, how is this going to benefit you? Which, by the way, some interesting stories from the continuum concept about that. What she talks about in there is that the adults made no bones about telling children the behavior they wanted. Okay? In other words, they were very good at setting boundaries for children. But they were never mean. They were never ornery. And if the child didn't want to do it, they didn't. Then just fine. Okay, you want to be antisocial? Be antisocial. I'm going to just ignore you. Go off and do my thing. But there was never any harshness, never any punishment about it. And one of the stories that really, really impressed me, because this would never happen in our culture. I mean, when I first read this book, I was like 15 years ago. This story had a profound impact on me. This one man had left the village and gone to work in white man civilization for a little while, and then he'd come back to the tribe and he'd fallen in love with one of the girls in the tribe and married her, and basically come back to the tribe. And he his father-in-law had a garden. I mean, these people grew vegetables and stuff like that. And he didn't want to plant a garden. He didn't, wasn't inclined. And he actually kind of, for about 5 years, other than doing a little hunting, lived primarily off the food that was provided by his in-laws, by his wife's husband. And nobody ever complained about it. And eventually what happened is he just started to feel the pressure of to contribute something, and he got in and started doing it and whatever, but no one ever tried to talk him into it. They just let him kind of leech off of them for a little while. And I was just like, you've got to be kidding. That kind of thing. I mean, in our society, we would feel so put out, so put on. This person, wasn't doing their share, and how can they blah, 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 just, what I'm talking about. But they were just so happy and carefree. It was like, I don't know. That was a really interesting story. Okay, this is a story that Wayne Dyer tells, and I like it. He says that there were two cats, an older cat who'd been around, for a long time, been a tomcat and so forth, and then a little younger cat who had gone to college, and the younger cat was chasing its tail, and the older cat said, "What are you chasing your tail for?" And the younger cat says, "Well, when I went to college, they taught me that happiness is in my tail, and so I'm chasing my tail because I know when I catch my tail, I'll have happiness." The older cat looked at him and thought for a minute, and he said, "Well, I never went to college, but, I've learned a few things, being on the street and being around for a little while. And I also know that what they taught you in college is true. Happiness is in your tail. And I carry it with me wherever I go." Online the other day on the internet, someone had, one of my friends here in St. George had posted this little thing. So don't think that enlightenment is this, the path to enlightenment is this blissful thing. It's painful because you have to let go of everything that doesn't serve you. You have to. It's a process of letting go and releasing and so forth. And I agree. And this other lady wrote, I think it's just the opposite. And I thought about that for a minute, and I thought, well, okay, the process of enlightenment has increased my happiness, increased my inner peace, but not because it gave me inner peace or inner happiness. It's that it strips away all the things that are preventing you from experiencing it. And that stripping away process is painful because it means you have to take a good hard look at these painful things and decide, well, do I want this or do I want happiness? Or as Wayne Dyer puts it, do I want this or do I want peace? Peace, happiness, and love, remember, all go together. And every minute or every day you're making a choice between, do you want this thing that you're upset about or do you want peace, love, and happiness? And you have to make a choice, which relates to this story from Anthony DeMello, which, again, very similar idea. Happiness is a butterfly, said the master. Chase it, and it eludes you. Sit down quietly, and it alights upon your shoulder. So what do I do to get happiness? Stop pursuing it. But is there nothing I can do? You must try sitting down quietly, if you dare. When was the last time that you actually spent time truly alone and truly quiet? Like I said, the vast majority of us, and believe me, I know because I've recognized the tendency to do that in myself, you know, to want to go watch TV or play a computer game or eat or do something in order to assuage the sense of loneliness or whatever. When I look at it, I realize I'm running away from feelings inside of myself. I'm running away from things inside of myself that I don't want to take a look at. That's why I agreed with this statement that the process of enlightenment can be very painful. It's because you have to sit and look at your pain. You have to look at the thing inside of you and have to say, why am I doing this to myself? What's going on here? And because remember, well, I attended some classes taught locally by, there's a branch of Sufism that teaches emotional healing stuff that was amazingly similar to what I had learned myself over the years. But they talk about this as, they call it the nafs, all this turbulence that's on the outer part of our life. But if you quiet yourself, if you go inward and quiet yourself and calm yourself down, which at first you're going to encounter the pain and all the other stuff that you're running away from. But if you stick with the process and just look at it, so that's okay. I feel that, but I'm choosing to be happy. And you go inside. Eventually, underneath all that, you find this realm of peace where there's this genuine happiness and joy that is always there. It's just that all the other stuff you're doing to chase it or pursue it basically is preventing you from experiencing it because you're never quiet. And in fact, generally this process of pursuing the happiness is again the idea that this is something I have to attain, not something that I can just choose to have. And Michael Singer explains it like this: the psyche, or what some spiritual people would call the ego, is built upon avoiding emotional pain. In other words, something happens to us and we felt hurt, we felt pain, and we go, I never want to experience that again. And I'm going to try to create all these defenses so that I never get hurt again, so that no one is ever able to treat me like that again, so blah, 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 blah. And so we build up this whole thing. That's on the negative side. On the other side, we build up attachments. I experience this pleasure and I never want to let it go, and I want to keep it in my life and I want to cling to it, whatever. That avoidance and clinging is basically creates this psyche, and it has fear of pain as its foundation, and part of that pain is fear of losing something that's meaningful to me, or fear of basically experiencing something unpleasant. Okay, so if you're doing something to avoid pain, then pain is running your life. Okay? Because all of your thoughts and your feelings will be affected by your fears. You will come to see that any behavior pattern based upon avoidance of pain becomes a doorway to pain. And this is the key thing I learned about emotional healing. The way out is through. Okay? That when you're willing to, whatever you're feeling, whether it's uncomfortable or painful or scary or whatever, when you're willing to just quietly sit with it and feel it and acknowledge it and let it be, it passes through you like a wave and it's gone. It is resistance that makes persistence. In other words, resisting the life, putting up resistance and blocks to life, which is all based on these preferences. I want it to be like this. I don't want it to be like that. Okay? Is actually what puts us in pain, because it keeps us from going with the flow of life as we did when we were kids. Keeps us from going with the flow of life like those native people that the author of the Continuum concept met. where they're just in the flow of life. Life has pain, okay, they're portaging, they're slipping on the rocks, they're blah, blah, blah. It's a challenge. We're going to face it. We'll get through it. They could still be happy. They could still be happy. And that's the message of tonight, is you can still be happy. Even when you have things that happen that are painful or whatever, you can still be happy. In fact, what Michael Singer says, and I think it's a really valid point, is that when something bad happens and then you're fretting about it and thinking, well, that shouldn't have happened, and why did that happen, and blah, 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 you're resisting what has already passed. Think about it. It's already happened. It's over. It's done with it. If you just let yourself feel the pain and acknowledge it, the pain passes through you, washes out it. It's experience. It's in the past. It's dead. It's gone. And you're back in the moment of life in which that doesn't exist. But it's resisting it, fighting it, wanting to make, that shouldn't have been, that should never happen again, blah, 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 and all this stuff that we do to ourselves that is actually making it impossible for us to just experience just the happiness. That's why the choice, do you want to choose to be happy, or do you not want to choose to be happy? Since avoiding the pain prohibits you from exploring that part of you that is beyond that layer, he's talking about the ego layer or the psyche layer, real growth takes place when you finally decide to deal with the pain. Because the pain is at the core of the heart, it radiates out and affects everything you do. But this pain is not the physical pain that you receive as messages from your body. Physical pain is only there when something is physically wrong. Inner pain is always there, hidden in the layers of our thoughts and emotions. We feel it most when our hearts go into turmoil, like when the world doesn't meet our expectations. So the process of just sitting with and acknowledging this and just letting it go and saying, hey, I choose to be happy. I don't care about that. It's in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. That doesn't matter. What happens to me in the future doesn't matter. What's happening is right now I'm choosing today, in this moment, right in this instant, to be happy. This is what I've been practicing all this year. And it's been a really fun and interesting experience. And I find myself getting amused at the most interesting things, including getting amused at myself. I mean, literally, I'll think a thought and I'll think, boy, that's a funny thought, and I'll start laughing. Just at myself and my own thought processes and everything. And you start to not take yourself so seriously. It's a really interesting thing, which leads us to this last story. What is the work of a master? Asked a solemn-faced visitor. To teach people to laugh, said the master gravely. I have I hope nobody gets offended with me mentioning this, but I have a book called The Laughing Jesus, in which this author basically points out that the some of the older manuscripts that have been dug up in the Middle East since, in the last 100 years, the Gnostic Gospels and all that sort of thing, portray Jesus as a very happy, pleasant, smiling person. And I thought about that, and anybody who little children would be attracted to, which the New Testament says that little children, went to Jesus, has to be a happy person, because children are not attracted to unhappy people. And, I think that happiness is our birthright and joy is our birthright. And I think we've lost it because we've been duped into thinking that it's dependent on us having a 401k and having a new car and having the right kind of house and sending kids to the right schools and all this other stuff that society puts on us and says, you need to have this and you need to have that, and you need to have the other, and you need to have this, and you need to keep up. And advertising is constantly teaching us the same thing, and TV and everything in our culture is constantly, saying it's not good enough. You got to keep going. Who's benefiting from that? I'm not. I actually a lot of times just really, I want a simpler life, just a life where I choose to be happy. And having read this, stuff in the Untethered Soul last year, I thought, what the heck? Let's just do it. I don't need to, let's stop worrying about all this stuff. Which brings me right back to the story that I started the last thing on gratitude with, which was, for those of you who didn't listen to that, I had a chiropractor named Michael Bernay. He was a mentor of mine. He taught me a lot about natural healing. And one day when I went to see him with a friend of mine, actually it was Lamar Wiscombe, for those of you who know him, his brother Rodney was there, and his brother asked us, well, what do you want? Okay, what do you want? And had us, think about some things that we wanted. I wanted a better relationship with my wife at the time. I think Lamar, can't remember what Lamar said, but he said, and why do you want that? And when we answered, he said, and why was that? Would that be important? Why? And the whole line of questioning was to get you to go into the bottom line and realize that everything that you want, everything that you're desiring, from, more money, a better home, a better car, nicer clothes, a better relationship, you're wanting it because you're perceiving that it will make you happy. That was the bottom line. That was what he was driving at. We want things for only one reason, is because we want to be happy. That is the number one thing we want. We want inside our primary motivation of every human being, no matter how deeply buried it is, no matter how distorted it's become by what's going on in the surface. At the core, every human being wants to experience love, peace, happiness, and that feeling of that, just to feel good. Our primary, and that's when I realized our primary motivation is emotional. What we primarily desire is emotional. And what he said is, what if I can show you how to have the end result, okay? How to be happy, how to have the happiness without having to have the other stuff. And that's when he taught me the apples up, stars in your eyes, chest out, hang on to your silver dollar, and glide down the glory road of life with a gratitude attitude. Apples up meaning cheeks up, and stars in your eyes is that twinkle. You can see those little, on this picture, she's got those little laugh lines, they're called, in face analysis, right off the edge of her eyes, which actually show a happy disposition, because your eyes, light up. Not just when you, a fake smile is when you smile with your mouth, but you don't smile with your eyes. A true smile extends to your eyes. Your eyes sparkle. So apples up, stars in your eyes, chest out, and hang on to your silver dollar is to stand up straight, tall, tuck the silver dollar in your tush so that you have to pull yourself upright, and then glide down the glory road of life with the gratitude attitude, being, as Rodney Alsop said, grateful for everything. Whether it appears to be good or bad, you should be grateful for it. And we talked about that last time. That lesson has really stuck with me, and I actually have endeavored to practice that, but it wasn't until I read that thing in The Untethered Soul where he says you don't really want to be happy. You want to be happy if things go the way you want. You want to be happy if you have that relationship. And that's when this all kind of came flooding back. If I choose to be happy, then I am choosing to get the end result of what I really want without necessarily having to have any of the other stuff in between. But that seems too simple. How can that be possible? But I've given you several examples of peoples who have had that happiness, who seem to be able to have that happiness in spite of what's going on in their life. So it's entirely possible. You just have to choose it. You have to choose to say, I'm going to make happiness and inner peace and a loving feelings in my heart more important than anything else. And when I make that the top priority, then it's like Wayne Dyer says, I learned the lesson, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way.
Thank you for watching this presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. Please give us a thumbs up to like it and share it with other people, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. For more information, check the links below to my member program, Facebook page, and other resources.